So this is a book where I think people are going to come for me for my rating of this book. Hi there, welcome or welcome back to Gabby Likes to Read. Today I will be presenting my November TBR as well as all the books that I read in October. So I read about 7 books in October and had an average rating of about 4.17 stars. So quite a few 5 stars and 4 stars. And then I had one 2 star and a few books I did not finish. So books that I just chose to close the book on them, so to speak, and move on to something else. So if you're interested in knowing about what those books were, keep on watching. So the first book that I read in October was Saving Savannah by Tanya Bolden. And this story follows Savannah Riddle. She is a young woman of means that is growing up in the early 1900s in Washington, D.C. So this is set during a very tumultuous time in the nation's history, America's history, because this is right around the time of the First World War. I believe it had just ended when the story is starting. And then also the Spanish flu epidemic had taken place. So there has been a lot of suffering, a lot of lives lost. And Savannah, being from where she is a bit disillusioned, essentially. She's tired of the cotillion balls and the fancy dresses and the fancy food and just going about her life as normal when she knows now how much suffering is happening in other parts of not just the world, but in our country. So essentially, she wants to do something about it. She wants to use whatever means and intellect that she has in order to serve others and help those around her. So I really love this book. I give it 5 stars. I thought that the writing was so compelling and interesting. So I really appreciated Tanya's ability to weave in historical events while we still were tied into the main character's story and her overall character arc. There were things about this book in particular, like what happened with the, which something I didn't know about was that there were quite a few riots that had taken place that started down south essentially and then moved its way up the coast. And so a lot of times, people within that community, in the Black community in DC, would read the newspaper like, oh, that's not going to happen. Thank God we don't live in the South. Like, that's not going to happen up here. But then eventually the unrest and the friction essentially that was there between Black and white people in the South, it made its way up the coast and it did affect people that were living in the DC area. All those different aspects of that, and there's plenty of other things that I don't want to get too far in the weeds about, drew me to this story, drew me to these characters. I also, one other thing I will add is that there was a cameo from Nanny Helen Burroughs in this story. She established a school for girls, and Savannah ended up helping her at that school. So I learned about Nanny Helen Burroughs from reading Carved in Ebony by Jasmine L. Holmes. And I really appreciated the fact that the author decided to shed even more light on a not as well-known historical figure. So I really enjoyed this book and I highly recommend it. Obviously, if you're really a fan of young adult stories, if you're a fan of historical fiction at all, I definitely recommend reading the author's note. You could tell that the author put in a lot of effort to make sure that the events and the characters that she brought up in the story were historically accurate. Next comes the DNF. So that was and this actually might be a book. If you follow me on Instagram, you might be surprised by this, but I DNF'd the Happily Ever After playlist by Abby Jimenez. And this is, I think, book 2 in the Friend Zone series. The first book is the Friend Zone. And in this one, we were following essentially the best friend to the main character in the Friend Zone. So I'll tell you, I DNF'd it. I read the Friend Zone and I really did enjoy it. I gave it, I believe, 4.5 stars initially because the story was really compelling, the banter was really fun, and the deeper message that was laced within the story was great. And I really felt connected to it. But I did feel like this story had way too much like spicy references, and spice essentially, if you're not aware, is kind of like anything that's like sexual or anything like that. So those kind of references and jokes were prevalent throughout the whole story. And so it kind of took away some of the love that I had for it, because I personally don't like and enjoy a lot of spice or spicy jokes within my books. But so essentially, I thought that we wouldn't get as much of those spicier scenes and spicier references because we're following Sloane, and Sloane was, not at all like Kristen. But, Abby Jimenez just, she really felt the need to kind of throw those things in there, and it just wasn't necessary, I felt. So I decided just to stop reading the book, and I'm not going to be continuing on with the series. I don't know if I'll read another book by Abby Jimenez again. I might, depending on what I hear from other people. I know that yours truly came out and everyone loved it. But yeah, if it's still more of the same, then probably be a no for me. And then I read Falling by TJ Newman, and this is a suspense thriller that follows Bill, and he is a commercial pilot. And 30 minutes before he's about to take off on his flight, he gets a call from a young man that's holding his family hostage. This young man is giving him two choices. Either he's going to crash the plane and save his family, or if he doesn't crash the plane, that this young man is going to kill his family. So Bill has quite the decision to make. This story really had me on the edge of my seat. I rated this book 4 stars. It was very quick. I read it via audio. It was about like a 4 hour, I believe, audiobook. So it went by really quickly. And I think the book itself, if you wanted to read it physically, is less than like 200 pages. So definitely can read it in one sitting. I really enjoyed the speed and the pace of this book. I like that we got different people's perspectives. So not just Bill, but also I think his good friend and coworker Joe, who was a flight attendant on the plane, his wife, the FBI agent that is assisting them with, navigating how to, end this without anyone being hurt. And yeah, it was really good. I highly recommend it. I know TJ Newman, I believe, formerly was a flight attendant. So there was that level of knowledge that was included in the book and about protocols and different things like that, which was cool to see. Yeah, if you're a fan of any shows like 24, NCIS, FBI's, any of the FBI's or Jack Ryan, I definitely think that you will like it. It was written in such a way that I feel like it might be adapted in a movie soon or a TV show. I can definitely see that happening. Yeah, it was really good, and I recommend it. The next book I read was Mexican Gothic by Sylvia Moreno Garcia, and this follows Noemi. She is a 1950s socialite in Mexico City, and she gets her world shaken up pretty quickly when she gets a letter from her best friend slash cousin, Catalina, that she's in trouble. Catalina recently got married to an Englishman and is living in a smaller city in Mexico, and she needs help. She sends a letter to Noemi saying that her husband is trying to kill her, his family is trying to kill her, and she needs Noemi to come for her as soon as possible. So Noemi's freaked out by this, and she decides to head to this estate where her cousin is living. And sure enough, there are very sinister and weird things going on in the family and in this house. So this is a book where I think people are going to come for me for my rating of this book. I gave this book 2 stars. But let me finish. Let me tell you why. Let me tell you why. I gave this book 2 stars because, and this was not about the writing. The writing was really good. It was really compelling. I liked the social commentary that was going on behind the scenes of this book, and the conversations, the dialogue was written really well. It was really interesting. It was just really creepy. It was really, really creepy, guys. Like, seriously creepy. Like, I knew, and I think I messed up. I personally think it was my fault. It's me. I'm the problem. Like, I went into this book, and all I really knew about it was that it was supposed to be a retelling of either Jane Eyre or Rebecca. So I was like, sure, let me give this retelling a try. But it was really creepy. And I know that I've heard in the past that Jane Eyre has been, I guess, marketed as Gothic horror. I feel like Jane Eyre leaned more into the Gothic part than the horror, but this book definitely leaned more into the horror than the Gothic part. It was definitely like very much a horror book. It was super creepy. I'm sorry I keep saying that word, but that's all that I can think of. It really made my skin crawl with some of the things happening in the book. And so, unless you really love horror, I don't recommend this book. I don't recommend it. So I will be giving Sylvia Moreno Garcia another chance. I think even maybe two more chances, because she's the type of writer that writes in different genres. Like she has a historical romance book that I picked up recently, so I do want to read that and maybe see if another genre might work for me. But because it wasn't the writing style at all, it was definitely just the genre. Like this was a horror book, and I should have known better. Okay, so moving right along out of that, I read Must Love Books by Shauna Robinson, and in this story we follow Nora. She is a editorial assistant for a small publishing house, and she is at a point in her life. She's in like her mid to late 20s. She realized that this dream job that she felt like she got when she first joined the company is not all that it is cracked up to be. So there's a lot of pay cuts and layoffs that are happening at her job. A lot of people are leaving, and she just is feeling really, torn up about it, broken up about it. Also, like she has to pay her bills, and there is an opportunity that comes up with a rival publishing house where they're in need of freelancers. So she jumps at the opportunity because she needs the money, but one of the prerequisites is that she had to quit her previous job. But she didn't do that. She ended up still working for her other publishing house while also working with the rival. So it's a little bit suspense filled because of that. And yeah, there's a little bit of romance that takes place, like a very small romantic subplot that takes place that was interesting to follow. And ultimately, this book is really about Nora figuring out her next steps. So I really enjoyed this book, and I gave it 4 stars because it the writing was really good. Anyone who's worked a corporate job is going to find certain aspects in this book that feel familiar. For example, there's a story in this book or there's a part in this book where Nora, in doing her editorial assistant job, as well as 2 other jobs together with that, is in charge of lunches when authors come into town. And she is taking orders for everybody in the office and all the guests. And she brings out the lunches, and the author, which I think his name is Nate, I could be wrong, but Nate opens up his lunch and he asks, "Hey, does this have avocado? Because I'm allergic." And I put in my request that I'm fine with anything but avocado. And she's like, "No, you said anything but tomato." And he's kind of like, "Okay, maybe I made a mistake. It's possible. I'll just eat something else." And then she not runs, but she eventually gets back to her office and goes through her emails, and she sees, oh my gosh, she did say like anything but avocado. And that becomes like a running joke like within the rest of the story. So I thought that was really funny and cute. But yeah, I think the conversation around the dream job and what it means to have a dream job, if it exists, how do you find a profession that you're not necessarily like finding your identity in, but that you feel called to, you actually enjoy going to work. All of those types of things were just really interesting to discuss. So I felt like I know this book was listed in the Reading Everybody Black challenge as like very comforting, and I definitely felt that. I felt like I was curling up with some chicken noodle soup and it was raining outside. Like it was very, very comforting. So I definitely recommend this book, and I'm looking forward to reading more of Shauna's work in the future. The next book that I read was How to Save Babylon by Safia Sinclair. I wanted to shout out TLC Book Tours and Simon & Schuster for Saying This My Way. I really enjoyed this memoir. So this memoir follows Safia, who is a young woman growing up in a Rastafarian household. Her dad and her mother both converted before she was even born. Actually, she's the oldest of 4. So before her birth, they converted. And yeah, it's about her childhood growing up in a Rastafarian household. I feel like the Rastafarian religion or tradition is very like known, but the intricacies and the details behind how it works and how different households are run under this tradition is not as well known until now. I feel like Safia did a great job of communicating not just the way that she grew up and her experiences, but also the history of Rastafarianism, the background of both her mom and her dad, and how they grew up and then decided to, enter into this religion. She did such a great job, and I feel like it gave a lot of context on why they made the decisions that they did, why they chose to raise their children the way that they did. And yeah, it was very, very well done. I highly recommend reading the audiobook. I know Scribd had it available, and I really enjoyed hearing Safia tell her story in her own words. One thing that was really interesting that I learned about in this book was that in Rastafarianism, there isn't really a foundational text that like all Rastafarians follow. And so every man essentially is like a mini god that decides on what's right, what's wrong, how people are treated, what can be allowed in the house, what can't be allowed in the house. As Safia and her sisters got older, the restrictions were heavy on the women. And there are many times where she was cut away. Her mom and her siblings were cut away from the outside world because of her father's fear that his family would be brainwashed by Balalan, which would be essentially like anyone in the outside world. I highly recommend reading the book because it shows you not just the history of Rastafarianism, but Safia's ability to overcome and, find her way, find her voice. And she was also the catalyst of her family making their own decisions and their own choices for their lives. Another really fun thing about this book and hearing the audiobook was Safia, spoke patois, like when she was having different conversations with people and recounting different stories. The next book that I read was Minor Detail by Adania Shibli. So we're following two perspectives. First, the perspective of a young Israeli soldier during the Nakba and his involvement in the realization of a young woman and also her death. And then also a young Palestinian woman specifically and her death. And another perspective is of a young woman 25 years later who finds this minor detail about this incident and is researching to figure out what exactly happened to the point of obsession. So this story was very well written and very intense and gripping. The way that the author was able to tie certain themes together through the different perspectives was very well done. And it was also just very painful to read, honestly. I don't know how to even rate this book. I read it maybe a couple days ago and still don't know how to rate it because of how it just shows you how Palestinians have been treated, not just back in the day, but also today. And so I definitely recommend this book if you want to just get a picture, a small glimpse of, the suffering that's happening. And the last book that I read in October was A Night at the Tropicana by Chanel Clayton. So in this story, we follow Natalie, and she is a doctor in her mid-40s. Her and her colleagues are hosting a charity event in Miami that is replicating a cabaret that was in Cuba during the 1950s, I believe. And so while she's at this event, she is, planning it, enjoying it, but also she's reflecting on her night at the Tropicana back in Cuba when she was 18. So yes, I absolutely enjoyed this story. I gave it 5 stars. This is actually my first taste of Chanel, not really. This is kind of my first taste of Chanel Clayton's work. I actually read a couple of pages of Next Year in Havana, maybe like, I want to say like a couple months ago, and loved it. It was so good that I actually had to stop. It was a library book. And I had to stop reading it. And I was like, oh, I want to annotate this book so much that I'm going to stop reading this book. I'm going to get it physically, and then I'm going to read and annotate it. So I do have, I think, Next Year in Havana and When We Left Cuba. So I'm really looking forward to reading those books after reading this one. But I love this story so much because we were able to learn about Natalie and her motivations, her reasonings behind becoming a doctor or wanting to become a doctor. And I just love the writing so much. It was so, she did such a great job of like making me care about this character within like an hour, which was crazy. But yeah, she did such a great job of just making Natalie so interesting, compelling. Who the people that she meets, they were interesting. Man, I'm not explaining this book. The other thing that I really liked was that Cuban history was kind of woven into the story, but Natalie and her character arc again was like very much center stage. We saw how those different historical moments affected her life, her upbringing, her parents' lives, but it didn't take away, or it didn't, I guess, overwhelm or overtake learning about Natalie and her story. So yes, I really did enjoy the story, and I do highly recommend it, especially if you kind of want to get into reading again. I think getting into a short story collection or just reading like a short story on Audible would be a great, way to get a taste of a author's work and get back into reading. So that's it with the wrap up. Let's get into the TBR. So for the month of November, I'm participating in a readathon I'm really excited about, and that is Historathon 4.0. So this readathon is hosted by Ashley, Lindsay, and Gloria. I'll have their pictures here, as well as their channels linked below. And each of them have 3 prompts that you can follow. I'll have the prompts here, as well as mention which ones I will be choosing for my TBR. Amanda's prompts are a color in the title, 3 words in the title, and the word book in the title. So I decided to pick one prompt from each of the creators. And for Amanda's prompts, I decided to choose a book with a color in the title. And for that one, I picked up The Last Green Valley by Mark Sullivan. And this is a historical fiction novel that follows a family as they journey from, I believe it's from Germany into the States, and then ultimately to the West Coast of the United States. I've had this on my shelf for at least 2 years, and it's actually one of my books that I wanted to read before the end of 2023. So I'm hoping I knock this out this month. So Lindsay's prompts are favorite author, set during a favorite time period, and recommended by a favorite. So for favorite author, I selected Queen of Exiles by Vanessa Riley. I am actually in the middle of reading that one right now, and I'm really enjoying it. This follows Queen Marie Louise Christophe, who was the first and only queen of Haiti. So in this story, we follow Queen Marie as she is navigating life with her and her children as they have been exiled from Haiti and are living in Europe. Next is Gloria's prompts. Set in a place you want to visit, 5-star prediction, and based on a true story. For set in a place I want to visit, I picked The Lost Queen by Signe Pike, and this is set in Scotland, a place that I've been wanting to visit for a very long time. So in this story, we are following Langareth, I believe her name is, and she is the lost or forgotten queen of Scotland, and she's also the twin sister to the man that inspired the legend of Merlin. So both of those things really intrigued me. Set in Scotland, Legend of Merlin, King Arthur, all of those things. I've had this one on my shelf for a while as well, so I'm looking forward to getting to this one pretty soon. And then outside of the prompts, I just have been really in the mood to read more historical fiction. I mean, I'm kind of always in the mood to read more historical fiction. So I picked up a few that I may be reading throughout the month of November. So we have The Belle of Belgrave Square, and this is by Mimi Matthews. So this is a historical romance that is set in, I believe, Regency, England. And we follow a young heiress who is going to be falling in love at some point. That's all I know. But I know this is the first, I think, in a series. So if I end up liking this one, I'll probably keep reading more books in the series. Next is Anna Maria and the Fox. This is another historical romance that is set in Victorian England, I believe. And we're following a young woman and a young man as they are going to be falling in love at some point too. There's a theme here. So I picked up this book because it has a marriage of convenience trope in it, as well as it is marketed as a slow burn. I read a few reviews that were non-spoilery, and a lot of people that tend to like a lot of spies didn't like that about this book. So I figured, I should pick it up, give it a try. Next is The Social Graces by Renee Rosen, and this is set during the Gilded Age in New York City. So in this story, you follow the Astors and the Vanderbilts, and is the constant feud between old money versus new money within the Gilded Age. So I love the Gilded Age, the TV show. I know that it's recently come out with the 2nd season, and so I wanted to read this book alongside the show this month. Next is All That Is Secret by Patricia Rayburn, and this is a murder mystery set in 1920s Chicago, and we're following a young professor that is pretty much trying to uncover a murder mystery of some kind. So from the blurb, it says that it is gonna give Sherlock Holmes a run for his money. So I'm interested to see if I end up enjoying this. I think this is like a duology of some kind, or the first in a series. I think Double the Secret or something like that. I'll put the picture up here. That's another book in the series. So we'll see if I like this one. Oh my goodness. Next is, and last I think, is going to be So Many Beginnings by Bethany C. Morrow. And then this is part of the Classics Remix series that they've been doing with a lot of older books and giving them a diverse spin. So this is a Little Women remix, and I loved and read, loved and read. I read and loved Little Women. And so when I saw that this was going to be a remix, I wanted to pick it up and give it a try. So if you don't know the story about Little Women, this follows 4 young girls, and their father is gone to war. I believe this is during the Revolutionary War, and they are trying to make it and survive. Not really survive, but cope with the fact that their dad is gone. Is during wartime. There's different financial struggles that come up. But then there's also, their sibling relationships and how they relate to one another with their mom, with new people in their community and in their lives. So I love the book so much. I love the different relationships that each of the siblings had with one another. And so I'm looking forward to seeing this diverse take to it. So that was it. That's my October wrap up, as well as my November TBR. Thank you so much for watching. And please let me know what you're planning on reading in November, what you read in October that you gave 5 stars that you absolutely adored. Feel free to like this video if you enjoyed it, and subscribe if you like to stick around. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in the next one. Take care.